Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Kayla and it's time to crack into a good book. So today's video is going to be a wrap up of, I think these are books, 11 through 20 that I read in September. And this is, a few of them are some books that I read for Monsterathon, so I think there are like 3 of them that counted for that, so I'll make sure to mention those. So I meant to film and post this over the weekend, but I just didn't have it in me to do that, so this is a little bit later than I wanted to post it, but you know, these things happen. Before I forget, I actually started a Discord channel and the link to join that is in the description below, so if you want to do that, you know, the link is there, and let me know if it doesn't work for any reason. I meant to talk about it earlier, but I think I had filmed the previous videos that I had posted before I had actually started the Discord, so I had to like, you know, add it in as like a little comment or note or whatever in the video. So this is the first time that I think I'm actually saying it in a video, so yay. It'd be great to have everybody there just to talk about, you know, books, life, other things that you enjoy, whatever. Like always, we will start at the lowest rated and work our way up to the highest. So the first book I will talk about is a 3-star book, and that's The Child Thief by Brom. For Monsterathon, this fulfilled the prompt of The Upside Down, which was to read a retelling. So this is like a dark retelling of Peter Pan. We follow Nick, who is 14, and he would have been murdered by drug dealers if Peter hadn't saved him. So he ends up following Peter to Avalon and must fight or die in the Devils, which are Peter's lost tribe of kids. And they're essentially trying to stop the flesh eaters and save magic in this dying land. So I think that this had pretty interesting ideas, but for me this felt overly long, and that was like my main complaint with this. Like, I really liked, you know, the combination of this dark retelling of Peter Pan and Arthurian legend type bits. It did have some lulls in the story, I think, where things weren't really progressing enough for my taste. There's obviously a ton of dark and brutal content here, so, you know, be aware for that. There's content warnings for things like rape, abuse, murder. Peter Pan itself is kind of a low-key, creepy story to begin with, so I think that this felt like a natural retelling of it. I definitely liked this take on it. Like I mentioned, I really like this combination of Arthurian legends and Celtic myth. So this kind of essentially becomes like a humans versus magic sort of story, and it's definitely sad to see magic dying out, but it's an interesting plot point. I think the ending was a little bit strange and kind of sad, but I guess it makes sense with the tone of the rest of the book. Throughout the story, we do get to learn about Peter's background, which was mostly interesting and definitely sad. Like, he's misunderstood and just wants to connect with people, but everyone's afraid of him, and, you know, bad things end up happening, and, you know, we kind of understand, like, why he is the way he is. In terms of the characters, I think most of them were not super likable. The kids definitely blindly follow Peter, and there's a lot of hero worship, which is not great. I did like Nick. He struggles with these internal conflicts, but like, you know, he seems to be the only one who actually questions things and is like, you know, not just going to blindly follow whatever Peter or some of the other characters say. I did really like the version of Captain Hook. Brom is also an artist, so we get some illustrations here. You know, we've got like, in this middle chunk, there's a few like full color art bits. So those are really nice. In general, I didn't like this as much as I thought I would. And I think, again, my main complaint was just like, it felt too long for me. But, you know, if it sounds interesting to you, definitely give it a shot. The next 3-star book that I'll talk about is Wine Dark Deep by R. Peter Keith. So I received this for review from NetGalley. So this is a like sci-fi novella. In the story, there's this key asteroid mine that's seized by revolutionaries, and the spaceship Ulysses is unable to refuel. So they kind of have to choose, like, should they abandon their mission or not? The captain is determined to get the fuel one way or another. So that's essentially all the story is about, and honestly, I don't think that this was super memorable for me. I definitely felt confused, and this is not a particularly long story either. It's certainly quick to read, but I feel like not much happened, so I guess in that sense it kind of reminds me of like an episode of a TV show where you have just this one plot point that you're focused on this entire time. So it's kind of a smaller scale snapshot of the world. We did have an AI character, Odysseus, which I thought was interesting. I did like this inclusion of it. But generally, I don't have the best sense of any of the characters other than maybe the captain, who seems kind of devious and a little bit clever in the ways that he's trying to get the fuel and get out. For me, this is kind of hard to tell at this point with this story if I really enjoy it or not, and I think that this is the first in a series of novellas, so I think maybe it would be better to read them all together just so you have like a better idea or sense of this world. But so like it was still enjoyable enough. I just did have some confusion with it and whatnot, and like I said, it wasn't the most memorable for me. But I think if you are interested in this more episodic nature of like a TV show and you want this in your sci-fi, this could work pretty well for you. So now we move to the 3.5-star ratings, and the first book I'll talk about here is We Hunt the Flame by Hafsah Faizal. So I buddy read this with Kat from Brews and Reviews. So this is a YA fantasy, and I think the first in a duology. So we follow Zafira, who is a hunter, and she has disguised herself as a man in order to hunt in this cursed forest to feed her people. We also have Nasir, who is an assassin prince. Both of these characters are kind of legends in this kingdom, and they're forced to kind of be who they don't necessarily want to be. There's a quest to get an artifact to restore magic to stop the spread of this cursed forest. Nasir is sent to kill Zafira, and an ancient evil is stirring. So I thought this was pretty enjoyable for the most part. I will say Act 1 is really strong, but then it kind of just trails off after that. I really liked this setting, and you definitely feel immersed in the world. It's like a desert setting, which is always an interesting setting for fantasy. For me, I think this particular setting kind of felt similar to that of the 12 Kings in Sharakai, though I will say I prefer the 12 Kings in Sharakai and like that whole, it's the Song of the Shattered Sands. I don't know if it's just because, it's an adult fantasy and you get a lot more development and everything. I do think this did a good job of feeling atmospheric, and the general setup was interesting, and I definitely wanted to know kind of what had happened in this world and why this cursed forest is spreading and what happened to the magic and everything. It's very easy to read, certainly, and I didn't really feel bored ever, which is good, despite there's a lot of nothing happening in Acts 2 and 3. In terms of the characters, Zafira, I had a hard time warming up to her at times, but I did like how she's trying to save her family and do what's right. She does have a lot of flip-flopping with her feelings, though, and that did kind of bother me at times. Nasir, I initially liked him quite a bit, but he, throughout the story, kind of has this, like, woe is me attitude and throws a bit of a pity party for himself, so, like, again, that kind of got on my nerves. The side characters were decent, but I thought they were kind of underutilized. There were some interesting reveals that Kat and I definitely called. There's a bit of romance here, and I don't know, I thought that this felt too rushed for me, like, I didn't really believe in it at all. There's definitely a lot of questionable actions by people, and we do have a lot of really interesting plot threads that are dangled, but we don't really get satisfying answers, I think, and generally there's a lot of angst. So, I mean, again, this is a 3.5-star book. Like, I would definitely recommend it. I had a fun time with it, and I would be interested in reading the second book in the series, which comes out, I think, next year, maybe. In terms of desert fantasy, I think there are others that are a bit better, less angsty, certainly. But like I said, again, this was a fun time, and if it sounds interesting to you, I would definitely recommend it. The next 3.5-star book I'll talk about is The Loop by Jeremy Robert Johnson. So I received this as a review copy from NetGalley. So this is like a conspiracy thriller / horror book where a young woman teams up with a group of outcasts to survive the night after an outbreak of violence. So we'll leave it at that because, I don't want to spoil anything. And I will say I did enjoy this overall. There's a lot of tense moments, and it's generally fast-paced. I will say the beginning is a little bit of a slow start, but things definitely escalate after that. There's a really high body count here and lots of blood. If that sounds like something that you're in the mood for, particularly for a fall read or, just in general, if you're in the mood for a slasher, like, this is going to be it. There's one particular element that I don't want to get into too much to avoid spoilers, but it's creepy, and I really liked it. So, like, if you've read this book, you probably can guess what I'm talking about. I really liked the ending here. I thought it was pretty appropriate and a little bit unexpected, honestly. There's definitely a lot of, like, sex and violence. It does get a bit crass at times, but I think that this felt pretty realistic in terms of the teenage point of view. We've got lots of hormones, and it just felt, I don't know, it felt fitting, I suppose. In terms of the characters, we mostly follow Lucy, who's our main character, and she does feel like a teenager. I liked how she tries to save those she loves, like friends and family. She does what she has to in order to survive as well. She, along the way, kind of has these really interesting internal realizations in terms of enjoying some things that maybe she shouldn't necessarily. So, I don't know. I felt like she was really truthful with herself, which was kind of refreshing to see, especially from a teenage character's point of view. She has some friends who help her along the way, and they're definitely good companions to have. Lucy is actually one of the only non-white people at her school, so we do have topics like bullying and racism that are addressed in this book. I also thought that the connection with the title was particularly interesting, so that was fun. There's also some really creepy moments that occur in a cave, and it's just kind of no. If you're in a horror book and there's any sort of cave, just don't go in there. Do you think this had a bit of a slower, shaky start? But after that, I definitely was interested in the story. I think that this is definitely a good book to read, particularly in the fall if you're looking for something a little bit spooky and, again, a slasher type book. So now we'll move to the 4-star books. And the first book I'll talk about here is Crest by Ice by Nalini Singh. So this is the third book, I think, in the Sci-Changeling series. And for Monsterathon, this fulfilled the prompt of Rearview Mirror, which was to read an indie book or a book published more than 5 years ago. This was published quite a while ago, I think. Back in 2007. So that definitely fulfilled the backlist prompt. This is a paranormal romance, and we follow Judd, who is formerly an elite soldier who has defected from the Psi Council. And we also have Brenna, who was abducted by a serial killer, and she is one of the changelings and is kind of dealing with the effects of that. A body is found, and our characters must investigate this and kind of deal with their growing attraction to one another. So I think that this was another great installment. It's pretty well paced. I really like this world. It's the first time, I think, that we've seen a male Psi and a female changeling. The Psi have these psychic powers. So there's all sorts of interesting powers here, and we get to explore more of the ramifications of the silence, which is kind of it basically prevents them from feeling things. But you get to kind of explore why that's bad for some people, but there's also some benefits for certain Psi characters, I guess. So that was really interesting to learn more about that. We get to see some more different types of changelings, like deer and hyena shifters, so that was kind of fun. In terms of the general mystery, this was pretty enjoyable. We've got a killer on the loose, schemes afoot. I love that sort of plot, so that worked really well for me. It definitely deals with some really heavy topics like PTSD, and this really does not get brushed aside, so I thought that this was handled pretty well. I thought Judd was very respectful of Brenna and doesn't dismiss her and her feelings, and he's very careful to not trigger her. The relationship is a very slow burn, and I really like seeing how it develops. I liked seeing Brenna begin to heal from her trauma. I really liked both of these leads. I think they both have things that they struggle with, but I liked seeing them kind of work to overcome these. Definitely enjoyed this installment, and it's a series that I definitely want to continue with. The next 4-star book I'll talk about is The Triumphant by Lesley Livingston. So this is the third and final book in this trilogy, which is a YA historical fantasy. So we follow Fallon and her fellow gladiatrix sisters. They're now very popular in the Republic. Then we have Kai, who must become a gladiator because of some of his actions in previous books. But the Ides of March are upon them. So they essentially have to help Cleopatra get out of Rome, and Fallon needs to decide who she is and who she wants to be. So I thought that this was a very enjoyable conclusion to the trilogy. I think it was generally well-paced, though the events at the end were a little bit more rushed than I wanted, I guess. I could have used more time in this world and just more time with these particular events. Definitely sad to leave this world. It's been just such a fun time. I've really enjoyed this trilogy. I have to say, I'm not surprised that the Ides of March are featured in here. I don't know. I feel like that was just kind of the natural conclusion to the story. It's a pretty big event, and if you're dealing with Caesar, you're gonna have to address the Ides of March at some point. I liked this whole plot about getting Cleopatra out of Rome. It definitely made for some very exciting moments. We got some excellent chase scenes and battles, and I think these were pretty well written. I continue to love these characters. It's great to see Fallon explore what she wants for herself a bit more. There's really excellent female friendships here between the gladiatrix sisters. And, it's just so nice to see these bonds and how far everyone is willing to go for each other. There's, we have, each of these characters have different fighting styles. That's just super fun. They all kind of feel unique, I think. There's definitely some really sad moments here with some certain events. And, I think it just speaks to how well written these characters are that I, genuinely care for them. I liked the involvement of Cleopatra here, and she's been involved in more of the other books, but we continue to see her. It's a very strong portrayal of her, and I like seeing how she actually helps out and takes an active role in things. I very much enjoyed this journey to Egypt. It's a fun new setting, and we get to have some downtime where our characters can have the time to really question what they want to do when things are settled. Obviously, we have some betrayals and schemes. Overall, it's a really great trilogy. I would definitely recommend this, especially if you also like, reading about gladiators in your books like I do. The next 4-star book I'll talk about is The Harp of Kings by Juliet Marillier. So this is the first in a new series, and this is historical fantasy. So we do follow the kids of characters from previous series, so I think it would be helpful to read those series first before jumping into this, but it won't be the end of the world if you pick up this series first. So we follow our main characters, who are a set of siblings, and they're musicians, but also training to be warriors on Swan Island. They're sent on a mission to retrieve the Harp of Kings, which is missing, but, this harp is needed for a ceremony to crown the new king. We also may have the other world meddling with things. So overall, I think that this was enjoyable, but I think it did take me a little bit to get into the story. Juliet Marillier's writing is just absolutely lovely, and she has this sort of lyrical quality to it, and it's one of those things where it's you just want to savor everything as it comes along. We do have some side stories that develop that, aren't necessarily related to the actual search for the harp, but I really liked these and enjoyed how everything kind of comes together. I liked this beginning on Swan Island quite a bit. That's where we have these warriors being trained, and I do hope that we get to revisit this more in future books in this series. I continue to really love this world. She's written several books that are generally, it's this Celtic sort of feel, and we've got the other world with fae creatures. She's definitely my go-to for historical fantasy, and I just really love everything that she's done. We do follow 3 points of view here. We have the 2 siblings. So we have a handy pronunciation guide, which I think she has these in most of her books, and I love to kind of, figure out what I'm trying to say. So we follow Lebbon and Brock, who are our siblings, and we also have Dow, who is a fellow warrior in training. So I will say I liked Lebbon's sections the best, though I did enjoy the others as well. There's a very slow burn romance, we're just seeing hints of one possible relationship here, so I'm super excited to see what happens here. We do have another relationship that's a bit more developed and further along, but it seems fitting and more reasonable, and it's still not insta-love. There's definitely an attraction there, and, they're kind of quicker to pursue that, I guess, than this other possible relationship, but it, I don't know, it wasn't insta-love. Dow is initially really quick to judge, but he kind of becomes more contemplative as the book progresses, and I just generally really like seeing the trust develop between all of our characters. Lebbon is just wonderful. She's a warrior, but she's also extremely kind. Brock is kind of a musician first, but he wants to help others and learn more about who he is. So yeah, this was wonderful. I'm definitely going to continue. I've actually bought the second book in the series, which just came out in September, I think. So I'm definitely excited to keep going with this. The last 4-star book I'll talk about is The Lovely and the Lost by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. So this is a YA survival thriller where we have Kira, who was a feral child. Earlier on in her life, she was found in the woods by this woman, Katie, and one of her search and rescue dogs. So she was adopted into this family, and years later, Kira still struggles a bit with human interaction, but she's continuing the family business of the search and rescue dogs, along with Katie's son and their neighbor. So they're called in to help find a missing child in a national park, and Kira starts to remember things about her past. So this was actually super enjoyable. I really loved the connection with these dogs and their involvement. It's so wholesome. I thought it was pretty well paced in general, and I was definitely interested in the story the entire time. There are some moments where they're not searching for this missing girl, where, they've got like research or whatever, that I think are maybe a bit slower, but I was still interested in what the characters were doing. The search for the girl is obviously very intense. Like I said, I kind of liked these quieter moments with, you get to explore more of like the bonding with the dogs and family bonds, research stuff. It definitely feels very outdoorsy and atmospheric. I love this found family aspect. Katie and her son Jude are so sweet, and I love seeing how they help Kira try to integrate into society, and they also know what's really triggering for her, and they definitely try to help her out. Kira I really liked, and I loved learning more about her memories as the book progresses. She's definitely experienced some traumatic events, but these seemed, her reactions seemed pretty realistic. I liked her drive to find this missing girl. It seems very understandable given her past. The ending is definitely crazy, and I do hope that there's a sequel, because I would just love to spend more time with these characters, especially, with all the dogs. It's so wonderful. I will say there are some content warnings here for animal death and abuse, so be aware of that, but I really enjoyed my time with this, and if you're interested in a YA survival thriller, definitely check this out. So now we move to the 4.5-star books. And the first book I'll talk about here is Silence by Tim Lebbon. So this, for Monsterathon, has fulfilled the prompt of the bunker, which was to read a book with a disability or deaf representation. So one of our main characters is deaf. This is a horror/thriller book where, like I said, okay, again, we have a cave. Don't go in caves in horror books, but there's this previously unexplored and like self-contained cave where people go in and understandably release these like bat creatures that hunt by sound and multiply rapidly. So that obviously is not going to go well. We follow Allie, who is deaf, and she and her family flee to this remote area to try to survive. This was really good. Oh my god. I will say I did find myself getting anxious at times because, there's like these really in-depth descriptions, I think, of this like rush on supplies and people getting really desperate, and, reading this during a pandemic is maybe not the best idea, but it happened, so I did have some anxiety about that. But that being said, I thought it was very fast-paced and engaging. I read it all in one night, just couldn't stop myself. This premise is really intriguing. I think, I don't know, the creatures are kind of described a bit, but I essentially ended up picturing them as blind pterodactyls, which I don't think is right, but, it certainly makes things a little bit more creepy, especially, given how fast they kind of take over things. People will definitely go a bit crazy, and it's alarming to see just how crazy and desperate people get. You get to see society break down, so that was definitely interesting. There are some content warnings here for animal death. I knew they were coming, but it was just like, I cried so much. It was so sad. So be aware of that going into this. We get to follow the points of view of Allie and her dad. I really liked Allie. She doesn't let being deaf impede how she lives her life, though like sometimes, she does feel excluded at times, but she is still generally like a very happy person. I really liked how into researching topics she is. It's definitely a useful skill for gathering information, especially like during this spread of these not pterodactyl creatures. But her dad is really protective of Allie and her brother. We get to explore the family dynamics some and just like how these events kind of bring everybody together. It's really tense, like I said. The ending is a little bit open-ended, and it kind of reminded me, I guess, of Bird Box in that sense, but I feel pretty satisfied with this overall, so if any of this sounds interesting to you, I would definitely recommend this. So the last book I'll talk about today is also another 4.5-star book, and that's Solitude of Wolverines by Alice Henderson. So I got this from NetGalley, and it comes out October 27th. This is a mystery/survival story where we follow Alex, who's a wildlife biologist, and she's sent to Montana for this job to study wolverines in a wildlife sanctuary. People are less than welcoming there, and one day she ends up seeing footage of a severely injured man in the woods. The law enforcement is kind of dismissive of this, and Alex eventually realizes that she is the one being hunted. So this was really enjoyable, and it's definitely a start to a series that I want to follow. I think there were some disjoint elements here, but I think that these plot threads are kind of building up to future books, so it kind of makes sense, gotta lay the groundwork first and then build up to it. I think in general this was pretty fast paced, and I was really drawn into the story. There are some slower moments where she's like checking traps and settling into her new location. So these are like more quiet moments, I guess, but they're super interesting. And we get a lot of detail about, you know, just like what she's doing and like how she's building the traps. And I thought these were actually really interesting details, so I just wanted to know more about that. There's a lot of great action scenes that are really intense, especially, you know, the ending. There's certainly some crazier elements here that I just like did not predict at all. In terms of the characters, I really liked our main character, Alex. She ends up taking this job after her relationship is kind of not going anywhere. And she was also shot at an event in Boston. You know, when she's there in Montana, I think she kind of is able to realize that this is where her passion really is, and she really needs to be true to herself and her own goals. She's also very intelligent and resourceful, so this was a great character to follow. So I think the only thing that stood out to me that may not appeal to some people is just this narrative about conservation maybe being a little bit too much at times. I didn't find this particularly bothersome because I do think that there is a need for conservation. There are some content warnings here for animal cruelty as well as gun violence and shooting, so do be aware of that. But like I said, I really enjoyed this and I definitely want to keep going with this series. So those are the 10 books that I have to talk to you about today. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books or think you might pick them up. For your question of the day, have you read many survival thrillers? And if so, do you have some recommendations for me? Because I've kind of been in the mood for that, I guess, lately. I don't know why, but, you know, with Solitude of Wolverines and The Lovely and the Lost, they were kind of, you know, fun survival things. I have Be Not Far From Me, I think, which is another YA survival thriller type book that I definitely want to get to. But if anyone else has some recommendations, definitely let me know. But I hope you're all having an excellent day and are reading something awesome. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a big thumbs up, so that would certainly help me out. But with that, I think I'm going to wrap it up here and see you in the next one.